Pucks with Haggs is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my stuff at substack.joehaggerty.com. Obviously, hosting the Pucks with Haggs podcast here at the CLNS Network and, NHL Network all over the place. So if I'm at a rink, if you're looking for hockey and I'm at a rink, you'll usually find me in some form or fashion of the media. But it's awesome to have you. I think it's the 18th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Today, it's going to be kind of a special development camp edition. I'm going to answer some fan questions after I was at Dev Camp for a few days at Warrior, taking a look at the best Bruins prospects, all 32 of them that were on the ice, both drafted, undrafted, and camp invites. But before we do that, let's just get into the sponsors real quick. The Pucks with Haggs podcast, as always, is sponsored by and powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. We love them. All kinds of good deals over at the app there, so check that out. And also by Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. So we appreciate the love from both of those titans, the FanDuel Sportsbook and Factor Meals. But for now, let's get back into the Bruins. Let's talk about Dev Camp. And first things first, I'm just going to give a quick rundown of the players that I liked at Dev Camp. And I wrote about it on my Substack. You can go check that out. I have rundowns from the days that I was there at camp. But I'll tell you right now, Oscar Jelvik I liked. Don Zlokomelis I liked. Kasper Nassen I thought was pretty good. He was a 7th-round pick in this past draft. 6'4" Swedish forward. Matt Poitras was good. Riley Duran was excellent. He was maybe arguably the best forward there. Beckett Hendrickson, who was another 2023 draft pick, I thought he was solid, and he was probably the best of the young forwards coming out of this draft class. Jake Schmaltz, who's been around for a few years, was a 7th-round pick in 2019. I thought he was very good, plays at the University of North Dakota. And as far as the defenseman goes, Frederic Brunet, I think he's been to a couple development camps now. He's from Quebec. He was not that great the last time I saw him, but he was much better this time around. Ty Gallagher from Boston University was very good. Mason Langenbrunner, who's now been in a few dev camps, and I did not like as much before. He's at Harvard, 5th-round pick in 2020. I really liked his game this time around. I think he's made some huge steps forward, so that was a good sign. And last but not least, the best player that I saw at the entire development camp, Mason Lohrei, the big defenseman from Ohio State that just signed with the Bruins at the end of last season and goes into this year really a guy that I think is at some point going to be in the NHL, just based on what I saw at development camp. He's a massive defenseman, 6'5", 215 pounds, moves the puck, plays good defense, has some skills offensively. Is not a Cale Makar by any means, but is certainly a guy that I think can run a quarterback spot on a power play from the point, and is going to provide a lot of offense from the back end, which could be a nice marriage with Jim Montgomery. But I thought there were a lot of good things I liked about him. And like I said, I think of all the players I saw at Dev Camp, I think he's the closest to the NHL, and he was the best player on the ice. So, 32 players. I don't think this was even close to the best crop of prospects that I've seen at a development camp. I don't think any of them were dominant players by any means. Lohrei was the closest to that, but I wouldn't call him a dominant player that's going to make a huge impact in the NHL. I can go from years past. I was at development camps when Tyler Seguin and David Pastrnak were there. Nobody like that was at this development camp. None of these players, fit into that category, not even close. But still some solid prospects, and I think at least a couple of players that are going to help them. But I also can understand why the Boston Bruins have a low-rated prospect group and system when it's evaluated by places like The Athletic and elsewhere, because I just don't think they have either the super high-end prospects that are really high-impact guys or going to be high-impact guys at the NHL, and they don't have that sort of like depth of prospects where you just see like 8, 9, 10 guys and you say they're definitely going to play in the NHL. They are not at that point yet. That's probably why they need to start accumulating draft picks again. Don Sweeney, you got to get on that. All right, let's answer some questions here from the folks out there. John Hawkwater wants me to know, will any of these players be up with the big club? Yes, I think Mason Lohrei probably will not start the year in Boston. But I think because he only played, I think, 5 games for the Providence Bruins, as he signed a amateur tryout agreement towards the end of last season after coming out of college. And he didn't sign his actual contract until after the AHL season was over, I believe. So he only played a handful of games. He played a few playoff games, and he looked good down there. But I think clearly as a 22-year-old kid, and defensemen are the type that, they tend to get at their best mid-20s, late 20s. It's not like forwards where they can come in at, except for the rare exception, at 22, 21, 20 years old and really dominate. I think most defensemen you see don't really get to where they're going to be and really get to NHL caliber until they hit their mid-20s, because it's such a difficult position to play. So I think he needs at least a half season in Providence to get used to the speed, get used to the physicality, get used to the pro game, before you just push him in to the NHL and push him into what's going to be a high pressure situation for him, because he's probably going to be a top 4 defenseman for the Boston Bruins. So I do think he's going to be up with the team this season. I think when he does come up, I think he's probably going to be, unless it's for an injury situation, it's going to be come up to stay, and probably necessitate a trade of another defenseman that's going to open up some cap space, whether it's Matt Grzelcyk, whether it's somebody else. I do think there's going to be a connection between Mason Lohrei coming up to the NHL roster, and once he shows he's ready to play, and some movement to create more cap space from that defenseman group that they're probably going to start the regular season with. So I think those are two very interconnected things, and Mason Lohrei is going to factor into that and going to create more cap space for the Bruins when they decide he's ready. But standard practice for the Bruins, we've seen this over the years. They're not going to rush their young players. They're going to put veteran players as kind of obstacles in their way that they're going to have to beat those guys out for jobs and push them out, and really force them to be at their best and force them to kind of be at that maturity level where they're ready for the NHL before it's earned and before it's handed to them. Not handed is a bad word, before it's like bestowed upon them, because they have to show that they earn it. And I don't think Mason Lohrei is quite there yet. But he did look excellent against college players, just drafted players, undrafted free agents that are going to be looking for pro hockey jobs. The 32 players that were at the Bruins development camp, he, I think, was the class of the defenseman, the best player. And, let's face it, I think the Bruins have told him to focus on defense, using his body to be a good defender, to kill plays, have a great stick, like all the things that you want a defenseman to do that's 6'5" and well over 200 pounds. And I think he played maybe like he's focused on defense more than, really being aggressive offensively. And once he gets comfortable at the NHL level, I think there's probably another level he can get to because the skill is there, but it's the right thing for him to be focused on defense right now as a young defenseman that's up and coming. All right. Zach R19, R underscore 19. Who out of those that attended Dev Camp are closest to making the main roster? Well, Zach, we just talked about Mason Lohrei. I think he's definitely one of them. Fabian Lysell is probably going to see some time in Boston this year. I was not particularly wowed by what I saw during development camp. He came in very slowly after he had a concussion at the end of last year that kind of knocked him out of the AHL season. We go back to the World Juniors. He really struggled there for Team Sweden, didn't have a great experience. And, I think there was a lot of adversity for Fabian Lysell last year as a young player, as a 19-year-old in the AHL. And, he didn't really light the world on fire after there was a lot of hype and excitement about him coming out of the Vancouver Giants. And I think that continued at development camp. He was not a dominant player, didn't score a ton or create a ton of offense when, they were doing the last day they were doing the 3-on-3 small area scrimmages. They do like a tournament, 3-on-3 small area games. And then they do a big full ice for maybe the last 20, 25 minutes of the last session, scrimmaging on full ice. And he didn't really factor in offensively in any of those situations. Didn't look dominant, didn't really show off the speed and skill that you would hope to see, especially against guys that are younger than him. And his peers, and we're not even talking about grizzled NHL veterans here. We're talking about his peers and people even younger than him and guys that were not first round picks. And the fact that he didn't really dominate and dance around these guys and really, didn't flash on the ice when he was out there, that's a concern for me. Was it that he was coming back from the injury, maybe didn't feel great this week, hadn't skated a lot, and was kind of behind the eight ball because of that? Was it because he wasn't that motivated for a development camp when at 20 years old, having logged an entire season in the NHL last year, he didn't feel like he had anything to prove, and kind of the motivation level wasn't as high for him as it was for other players out there? I really don't know. It's hard to answer that question, but all I can tell you is that this is a huge season for him at 20 years old, after having some lackluster experiences and maybe losing some of the shine on him as a prospect last year. And I think this is going to be a massive season for him to recoup some of that, to really become the dominant offensive player they think he can be, based on his skating speed, based on his skill, based on what we've seen when he makes plays, whether it was the Vancouver Giants or in Sweden, or he even had flashes last year in Providence, but it wasn't enough. And I think he needs to show this season coming up that there's a lot more there. And if he does that, I think he is going to get some looks at the NHL level. Full circle answering the question, Mason Lohrei is definitely the closest to the NHL. I think Fabian Lysell will be fairly close to the NHL, because I think he's going to get some chances this year, especially if he responds and he plays pretty well. And beyond that, Riley Durant's still a college player. He's at Providence College, but I think he's got a pro game. He looks to me like he's going to be an NHL player. He's not going to be, I don't think, a top six guy. He's not going to be a power play guy. But I think you're looking at a third or a fourth line player that could play in the NHL for a long time, based on the size, the work ethic, the intelligence, and he's got a hell of a shot. Heavy, just rifle snapshot that, like, goalies, he beats straight up when he, in shootouts, when he flashes it, when he lets it go with the release, they don't even see it coming. And if you can beat those kind of goalies with a simple wrist shot, that's a pretty dangerous shot. So you put a lot of the elements he has, plus he wins a ton of battles. I think that's the kind of guy that is going to translate to the NHL. And I think as long as he stays healthy, I think, he's going to be a guy that in a few years from now, we're probably going to see in Boston. So I would put him in that category. And beyond that, guys like Ryan Mast, Matt Poitras, I think is another guy that I think could, get some looks this year in his first year. Well, I actually won't be this year, but the year after, he may get some looks. So he may be like a year away. Beyond that, I'm not sure a lot of these players are, within a couple of years. We'll see. Brett Harrison's another one I would put in that category where you may see him at some point as well. But I think you got to look at Lysell and Lohrei as the two big prospects coming out of this development camp that are closest to the NHL. And I think Riley Durant is the one that looks like he's got the elements to be a pro player of all the guys that I saw as well. But, we're talking about kids in their early 20s that still have a lot of time to develop. So are there any players not named Lohrei or Lysell that can be top 6 forward or top 4D from Lucino on Twitter? Top 6 forwards or top 4D. Listen, there's one player I will tell you really jumped out at me. Oscar Jelvik, Boston College, 20 years old. He's only 5'11", like 180 pounds, so he's not that big. And he's going to have to, at that size, he's going to have to prove a lot of things before he's going to get, real serious looks. But the skill level's there. Like, he was in tight spaces, dangling through players during the 3-on-3 drills when there's not a lot of space, especially around the net. At points, he and Riley Durant and Brett Harrison, when they were playing in that 3-on-3 small area tournament, when they were on the ice together, they were dominant. They were scoring goals. The other team couldn't get the puck away from them. They were moving the puck quickly. Jelvik can create his own shot. He had a nasty shootout move where he faked between his legs and then roofed a backhander when they were doing shootouts at the very end of the scrimmage. Like, he's got a shot. He can pass. He's got great vision. He's got extremely good hands and a good handle on the puck and a good skater. So he's a guy I think could be sneaky good. He's in a good college hockey program in Boston College. And we all know the stud players, Will Smith and all the others that are coming into Boston College this coming season. So it could be a huge year for Jelvik, where he really raises his profile and puts up a huge season after I think he had 4 goals and 17 points as a freshman for the Eagles last year. So that's a guy I would look at and say maybe top 6, potentially in his future. Another top 4 defenseman besides Lohrei, I'm not sure. Maybe Frederic Brunet. That would be the only guy I would say. 19 years old, 6'3", 192 pounds, out of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Did not love him a couple of years ago at Dev Camp. I thought he was like over his head as a first timer, but this second time around, big shot from the point, definite offensive instincts, patient with the puck, was setting guys up to make plays in the offensive zone. Looks like he could be a power play guy. That might be a guy with the offensive upside and with the size that he has that may profile to be a top 4 defenseman. So I would say Brunet and Jelvik are the 2 guys to look at where there's a lot high ceiling and there's a lot of room to grow. There's a few other ones too, no doubt about it. But those are the 2 I look at the most and say maybe they're going to surprise us a little bit a year or 2 down the line. All right, let's see what we have next. MBB on Twitter. Jackson Edward has popped out of nowhere. His game has definitely improved from the 7th round pick he was picked up from. Where do you think he will end up? Jackson Edward was interesting. Like 19-year-old kid, 6'3", 200 pounds, 7th round pick, London Knights. I remember him a little bit last year. I actually noticed him even more this year. Definitely, I don't think he's a top 4 defenseman, but like what I did notice was he was pissing off Oscar Jelvik and some other players by really, really being rough and physical with them in these 3-on-3 small area tournament games that they were doing. He was kind of throwing shoulders around and really getting physical. At one point, he pissed off Jelvik to the point where Jelvik snapped his stick when he came off the ice after his shift was over. And then he had to go scurrying for a new one before he was about to go right back on the ice. I also noticed Jackson Edward tried to score on a Michigan during a 2-on-2 drill that I think it was Mason Lohrei like quickly swatted the puck away when he was trying to do it. But I watched him and he looked to me like he was a little bit bigger Connor Clifton. Like he's got some Connor Clifton to his game as far as some attitude, some snarl. We like to say players sometimes have a little FU in their game. And I think he's one of those kind of players that has that. And frankly, I didn't think there was enough of that at development camp. I don't think we saw enough players that had a little bit of an attitude and were playing physical and, were in your face, especially considering how much I think the Bruins need players like that. I was a little too polite at times at development camp, but I think Jackson Edwards was one of the few guys that was not playing polite and kind of had a little bit of an attitude. So we'll see how he does moving forward. But I liked what I saw in dev camp, and I think his progression is pretty good. Jack Kane asks, which NHL player, current or past, would you say Riley Duran resembles the most? That's a tough question. He's a 6'2", 200 pounds, pretty good skater, very good two-way game, like awesome shot, just NHL caliber shot already. Smart player, hustles, definitely plays at both ends, wins a ton of battles. I want to say like he's not a center, but I he's a little more physical. Brian Boyle, maybe. I think he might end up even. I don't know. Maybe he's that kind of a player. He may end up that sort of player at the pro ranks. But because he's bigger, because he's got a really good shot, because he wins more than his share of battles, he uses his size and strength really well. Smart player. There's a lot of similarities between the two players. And obviously Brian Boyle was a fantastic NHL player and a former first round pick. So that's, lofty praise for Riley Duran, but that's kind of maybe a little bit of who he reminds me of. But like, I don't think there's somebody I would say in the NHL that I'm watching right now and say, that's him. Maybe Garnett Hathaway might be that kind of a player too, because he definitely has the physical side and he's going to play physical like Hathaway. And I think he may even have a little bit more of an offensive upside than Hathaway does, but I think he's that kind of a player. He could be that kind of a player. Certainly he's a Woburn kid. I don't think he's going to shy away from the physicality. So, that's a good thing, but I think that's what you're looking at for him. Maybe at the NHL level is a third line guy that plays really physical, plays with energy, can finish off offensive plays, will be able to kill penalties, is going to be able to do a lot of really good things to help your team win games. So nothing but good stuff from him. You know, there was a few other players I liked, college hockey players, and I'm kind of critical of the Bruins in general because I don't like how many American players that they've drafted over the years. There were only 10 Canadian players at the prospect development camp. 10 out of 32 prospects the Bruins have right now are Canadian. And I just don't think that's enough. You know, I think maybe half and half is good. Maybe if you had 5 more Canadian kids and maybe half of the group was from Canada, that would be better. And I know it sounds ridiculous that a Boston guy, a guy that coaches kids and is involved in USA hockey and, enjoys USA hockey would advocate for anything but American kids. But like, if you're an NHL team, you need to invest in the Canadian players and the OHL players. And I do think there's a lack of that. But that being said, I think Riley Duran's one of those local college kids that they hit the bullseye on and is exactly the kind of player that they want in their organization and is going to represent them well and is going to end up being an NHL player. And, so they deserve a pat on the back for drafting that kid when, maybe there weren't a ton of teams that were going to look at him and give him a serious look before the Bruins did. All right. Let's see what we got next here. Would you say you are more or less encouraged by what you've seen in the prospect cupboard this past week for the Bruins from Mark Atherton? Well, I would say a little more. It's easy to bash the Bruins draft and development system right now. They don't have a ton of draft picks. They've traded away a lot of their first rounders. So anytime you have that because your team is competitive, your prospect system is not going to be great and it's not going to be highly rated. Most of the highest rated prospect systems in the NHL are for teams that continue to get lottery first round picks and continue to have their draft picks year after year and don't have to trade them because they're not buyers at the trade deadline. So, there's definitely a pattern that develops there where if you're a team like the Bruins that's in the playoff hunt every year and is going for a cup, you're going to have less of those assets because you're trading them away at the deadline. And, who's going to argue in hindsight, with hindsight being 2020, who's going to argue that they shouldn't have spent first round picks to get Tyler Bertuzzi and Garnet Hathaway and Dmitry Orlov at the trade deadline and gone for it last year and ended up with that wagon of a team where they should have won. You got to go at that point and go all in if you're the Boston Bruins. I don't understand how you could argue against that, even knowing how it was going to end and it being disappointed. The Bruins did the right thing there. And by and large, they've done that. The Rick Nash deal that Don Sweeney did way back when, where he traded Ryan Lindgren to the Rangers, who's a player that definitely the Bruins could have used, and he traded a first-round pick. You can bash him in hindsight and say, oh, Rick Nash was a dud. He didn't help them do anything in the playoffs, but that was the right move. They were going to extend him if he stayed healthy. They wanted to keep him around. He was the right fit for them at the time until he got dinged up. So there's been a few situations like that for the Bruins where they've given up first round picks and given up their assets for the right reasons, but it means they don't have the top prospects anymore because they've traded those picks away. And, they have missed on some first rounders too. Most famously in 2015 with Zach Senyshyn, that was a big miss. Jakob Sporl is still with the organization, still with the team, but basically he's a 7th defenseman. And when you're drafting in the middle of the first round, you're not drafting, to be an extra D on the NHL roster. So you could say they missed on 2 of those 3 while hitting with Jake DeBrusk. Trent Frederick in the first round, I think in hindsight, it does not look like a great pick. I don't think he looks like a first round talent, especially when you had Alex DeBrincat, a few picks later, going to the Chicago Blackhawks. So, they've missed a few times. There've been a few high profile misses. They've obviously hit on some players, Charlie McAvoy, and others, but some latter round picks too. There's a couple of draft classes that are actually looking pretty good for the Bruins where they produced a lot of NHL players under Don Sweeney and the current scouting staff. But in general, getting back to the point of the question, they've been lower rated the last few years and with good reason. So I went into this development camp, not with high hopes, not with big expectations that I was going to get blown away by what I saw, but I did see they have a legit NHL prospect, blue chip prospect at the defenseman position in Mason Lohrei. He's going to be an extremely good defenseman. He looks like he's going to be a top 4 defenseman in the NHL for the next 10 years. That's what I saw. I saw a 6'5" defenseman with athleticism, with the ability to skate, with some offensive skills, with the ability to move the puck up the ice, also with the ability to survive in the defensive zone. Like, to start your prospect cupboard off with a blue chip top four D man that is a 6'5" guy that has all that skills, that's a great place to start. But after that, it drops off. Fabian Lysell did not have a good development camp, and I did not have a good season. His stock has dropped. So there's no dynamic, dazzling forward prospect that they have by any stretch, whether it's Lysell, whether it's not having a first or a second round pick in this draft. I just don't think that player is there. But I did see some other players I liked. I really liked, as I said, Riley Duran, Oscar Jelvik. Those were a couple right off the bat I thought were excellent players. And I do think they picked up guys like Ryan Walsh, Beckett Henderson, Casper Nassen in this draft, this past draft. I thought were very good players in development camp and impressed me, especially as teenagers, going against some guys that are in their early 20s and they're, been playing college hockey for a few years or already have pro games on their resume. So there was a couple of players I really liked. Brunet was another one that I thought was very good and kind of raised his profile in my eyes. So there was probably 4 or 5 players that have raised their stock quite a bit. Mason Langenbrunner was another one from where I'd seen them before. So in that sense, I was impressed, surprised, sort of satisfied with what I saw, and think more highly of some of the guys that they do have after watching development camp. But at the end of the day, they still have a ton of work to do to build back the numbers, to build back the quality, to build it back into being like, what would even be a middle of the road draft and development system. Because right now they don't have it. So we'll take a break from the questions right now. And we're actually going to thank our sponsors at FanDuel.
Take your swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could use to bet against the Red Sox because you think they're going to lose most nights. It's on a safe app that's secure and really easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. That's why we love FanDuel Sportsbook. So there's really no better place than to use it, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS network. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/Boston to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. And you'll land up to $200 in bonus bets based on the first bet that you give them.
All right. Getting back to the questions. Somebody wanted to know, how have the goalies looked in development camp? Okay. Reed Dick, I thought was pretty good. 19-year-old with the Swift Current Broncos. He was a 6th round pick last summer. I thought he was solid. He was fine. They had the camp invite from Harvard, Derek Mullehy, from Scituate, that I also thought was pretty good. I thought he looked fine. They had a Ukrainian invite from HC Sparta, Praha in Prague, the Czech league. I also thought he looked pretty good. The issue is the 4th round pick in 2021, Philip Svedabak, who was a freshman at Providence College this past season, and it actually had decent numbers at Providence. But this is the second development camp in a row where I've watched Svedabak and I don't like what I see. I see a lot of pucks getting through him in practice. And, one person I was talking to while development camp was going on kind of laughed and was like, he's not a practice goalie. That's fine. If development camp doesn't light your fire, it doesn't get you jacked up and you're kind of going through the motions, you don't feel like you even want to be there. You're a draft pick. You don't, or practice is just kind of boring to you and it doesn't get the best out of you and you see much better performances in big games. Fine, whatever. Maybe that's who he's going to be and time will bear that out. But I can tell you, I saw too many 5-hole goals that he allowed. I saw too many pucks sneaking through him at times. The 3-on-3 tournament ended with Mason Lohrei's team, Mason Lohrei, Mason Langenbrunner, there were a few other players playing against Riley Duran, Oscar Jelvik, and a few other guys, Brett Harrison. And Svedabak was the goalie for Riley Duran and Oscar Jelvik's team. and it was 1-1. And this was the trophy game. This was a championship game. All the other players from development camp at that point had stopped and were watching what was going on in this game. This was the game for the bragging rights, the trophy. And it was 1-1. Riley Duran scored, and then the other team scored right at the end to tie it up, and it went into overtime. There was an opening face-off in the 3-on-3 small area game, and then immediately Mason Langenbrunner got the puck, went straight towards the net, crashed the net, 5-hold, Svedback, they win. It was a weak goal. It was a soft goal. It was, for those players, that's a big moment. That's a show me moment where, it's win or lose right there. It was next goal wins, and he gives up a terrible goal right off a faceoff. And it was like everybody was looking forward to watching how these two teams were going to compete and see how they were going to win. And it was like over before it even started. And that was kind of indicative of, I thought, this entire week for Svedback. I just think he was disappointing. Too many soft, easy goals. Does not live up to the sort of hype or what you hope to see out of him. And I remember feeling the same way about him last year. And I think there were more highs and lows last year where he made some spectacular saves and he let in some bad goals. This time around, I didn't really even notice the spectacular saves. I just noticed the leaky, soft goals, like that goal to Langenbrunner that won the tournament for the other team. That to me is something I don't like. It's not to see. That's not what you're looking for. If you're the Boston Bruins looking for a goalie that's going to bail you out, that's going to win games for you, stand on his head, be there in the big moments. We just saw Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman struggle at when they were in their playoffs, primarily Ullmark. Swayman I thought was fine in game 7 when he finally got in there, but we've seen too much of this, goalies struggling in the big moments. You don't want to see that out of your prospects that are coming up, that you're putting you're setting your sights on. Maybe it's a good thing they have Swayman, who is young, only a couple of years older than Svedback, and looks like he's going to be here for a long time, because I didn't see any goalie prospects in this particular development camp. Like when I saw Swayman a few years ago at development camp and said they have something here, I didn't see that this time around with the Boston Bruins goalie prospects. All right. Raul Duke, during a unique transitional year, factoring roster turnover, influx of youth, plus centennial celebrations, what are you most looking forward to? Wow, that's a really good question. I am most looking forward to hopefully seeing Patrice Bergeron play his 20th season with the Boston Bruins in their 100th centennial celebration, being involved in all of the different commemorations of the original Six franchise and its 100 years in the NHL. And I really hope he comes back for one more season. That is selfishly what I'm looking forward to, because I want to see him play one more year. I want to cover practice and be able to go and talk to Bergeron as the captain after practice is over or after a big game, and him continue to be the leadership group and be the leader of that team and be sort of the voice of that team and really be at the head of the culture of that team. I hope we get one more year of watching him do his thing, because it's been a pleasure for the last 19. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Okay, let's go. One more question. We'll go two more questions. Hot Rod Nate 15. We've all heard about the Lohrei, Lysell, Harrison, Merkulov hype. What's a name that impressed you that has flown under the radar? Harrison's was a solid player. I think he's got some good things that he's done, but I don't think there's a ton of hype with him right now. We'll see what he does in the pro ranks. He's had some decent moments. He made a good pass, I think it was to Cole Spicer, to set him up for a goal during the full ice scrimmage. So he has his moments and he stands up and makes some good plays. But I also think, he's not I wouldn't put him in the top 5 of the forwards that I saw in development camp this week. One guy I did like, and he's been mentioned a few times, Matt Poitras. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know if it's Poitras. I got to ask him. Good Ontario kid, Gulf Storm, 2nd round pick. I think there's a decent amount of hype with him. I don't think, clearly not a dominant player, but I think he was advertised as a playmaking smart center that takes care of small details, will set up his teammates, will make players around him better. And I think in those respects, as advertised, when I watched him in the game situations, great passes, sees the ice really well, very clever, smart player, knows how to make plays and set up his teammates. I wrote this when I was kind of watching him play. I think he picks his spots when it comes to like back checking, play away from the puck, defensively, like certain things that he's going to have to get better at in the pro game. If he really wants to play center and if he really wants to be like a top 6 center in the NHL, he needs to get better at that other stuff. But I think some of the natural requirements of skill, vision, playmaking, like he's not David Krejci, but I think he did some things that I thought were reminiscent of David Krejci as far as making plays and the way he views the ice. And the way he can see teammates to set them up and the way he can execute passes. So that's a guy I would pick as kind of a second tier guy that I actually liked. I liked him better than Harrison, to be honest with you. Okay. In your opinion of the young guys who could make a push for being on the Bees roster by, say, November, December, Andrew Hartstone. And I think I'm going to close with this because I've answered it a few times. I think it's Mason Lohrei, excuse me. That's the guy. And I thought that was the guy going in. I assumed going into this development camp, Mason Lohrei was going to be the best player among the Boston Bruins prospects. He was going to be the best guy of the 32 players on the ice. I was hoping that was going to be the case because I'd seen him in past. I'd really liked him. I saw him a little bit at Ohio State. I thought he was a very good player there. Like the book on him is that he's a very big defenseman, that ideal NHL size and strength, and also has the skill to go along with it. So I wanted to see that among his peers because he really didn't take part in development camp last year. So this was the first year we're really going to get a close look at him kind of as he enters his NHL sort of age, early 20s, where he should be able to separate from other players. And I thought he did. You know, he checked every box, passed every test with flying colors during Bruins development camp this week. Looks like he should be the best defenseman on the Providence team, be a leader on that team, and maybe take a couple of months and then push towards an NHL roster spot. And like I said, that could create a domino effect where all of a sudden the Bruins are ready to pull the trigger on a trade to make room for him if he shows that he's ready, truly ready. For the NHL level. And, they could get a player to come in, a younger player on an entry level contract and maybe, trade some salary cap space somewhere else in order to get themselves $2 or $3 million in space to maybe make another deal at the trade deadline. So Lohrai's the guy. I think that was the only one I saw that said that he may be playing for them in November, December. Everybody else will probably be in Providence or on their junior team or still with their college. And that's okay because it's the long game with a lot of these prospects. And, it's impressive when you go through the names that have come through the system. I actually, did the homework. Somebody had asked me on Twitter, and this actually would have been a good question to ask about. Let me get the question. Ben Altscher said, "Hey, Joe, maybe a big ask, but what's the recent history last 10 years of these development camp players turning into key contributors at the NHL level at some point in their careers?" So I went back and looked. Jake DeBrusk, David Pasternak, Charlie McAvoy, Brandon Carlo, Jeremy Swayman, Trent Frederick, Anders Bjork, Danton Heinen, Ryan Donato, Jeremy Lozon, Dan Vladar, Ryan Lindgren, Drew O'Connor, Carson Coleman, Sean Corrali, Noel Achari. And there were even a few other players that were, Brandon Tanev was one, that were camp invites. Alex Iafallo was another one, who were actually in development camps with the Bruins over the last 10 years and have turned into, very good NHL players. So, the talent is there. There's going to be a couple of guys, maybe even some that I didn't mention that I really like this week that are going to pop and they're going to be in the NHL. I would bet money on Mason Lohrei and Riley Durant definitely being NHL players. And, beyond that, we'll see. But there's no doubt there's a lot of talent on that ice this week. And it was fun to watch. All right. That's going to do it for this week. I want to thank our sponsors one more time. FanDuel Sportsbook, as always, got to love them. FanDuel.com/Boston to get up to $200 in bonus bets. Head over to them. And we also got to thank Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Love those guys. They crush it. Meal ready in 2 minutes. keto options, healthy options, vegan options, all the stuff my wife loves, the healthy food that I can't stand. She loves it. So they've got plenty of stuff I like there as well. So it's good stuff and good meals for everybody. And that's what we're trying to do, make everybody happy, right? That's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in to Pucks with Haggs. We'll see you at the rink.